Good afternoon, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. We shall start early today with the chanting before Ajahn Brahmali joins us. So let's start our puja. Preliminary homage to the Buddha. Let us pay homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Please put your palms together to partake in offerings to the Buddha. Please join us to read the verses together. Offering of light. Light symbolizes wisdom. May the light of Dhamma dispel the darkness of ignorance. Offering of incense. Incense symbolizes the fragrance of pure moral conduct. This reminds us to cultivate good conduct. Offering of water. Water symbolizes purity, clarity, and calmness. It reminds us to practice the Buddha's teachings, to cleanse one's mind, which is full of desires, ill will, and delusion, to attain the state of purity. Offering of fruits. Fruits symbolize the ultimate fruit of enlightenment, which is our goal. They also remind us that all actions will have their effects. Offering of flowers. Flowers symbolize impermanence. The freshness, fragrance, and beauty of flowers are impermanent. This reminds us that we should all live in the present. Remembering thus, we should reduce our craving and attachment. Salutation to the Triple Gem. Let us pay respects to the Triple Gem. Arahang Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Going for refuge, we chant the verses for taking the three refuges. Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang Saranang Gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang Saranang Gacchami. The five precepts, we chant these verses to observe the five precepts. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Adinadana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Kamesu Miccachara Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Musavada Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Sura Meraya Majjapamadatthana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Recollection of the Buddha. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Buddha. Itipiso bhagava arahang samma sambuddho vijjacharana sampano sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhammasarati satta deva manusanang Buddho Bhagavati. Recollection of the Dhamma. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Dhamma. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipassiko Opanaiko Pacchattam Veditabo Vinyuhiti. Recollection of the Sangha. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Sangha. Supatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Ujupatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Nyaya Patipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Sami Chipatipano Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Yadidang Chattari Purisa Yugani Atta Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Sawaka Sangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Punyaketang Lokasati. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We shall wait a while for Ajahn Brahmali to join us. So today's topic, okay. Today's topic is, was the Buddha a Hindu?
Hello, Eileen.
Hello, Ajahn. Good afternoon, Ajahn.
Afternoon. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Excellent. So, okay.
So let us pay respects to Ajahn with 3 bows.
Yeah.
Second bow. Third bow.
I can see you in the Dhamma hall over there. Who is there?
Brother Pang Hong, Brother Vincent, Brother Sun Kiet, Brother Oliver, and Brother Upul.
Okay, very good. That's marvelous. Okay,
A few of them are upstairs doing another event. There's another event going on.
Okay.
So may I read Ajahn Brahmali for those who don't know Ajahn, but I'm sure most of them know Ajahn by now. Ajahn Brahmali, who was born in Norway in 1964, first became interested in Buddhism and meditation in his early 20s. Having completed degrees in engineering and finance, he began his monastic training as an anagarika, keeping the 8 precepts in England at Amaravati and Chithurst Buddhist Monastery. Ajahn Brahmali then traveled to Australia and has lived at Bodhiana Monastery since 1994, ordaining as a bhikkhu in 1996 with Ajahn Brahm as his preceptor. He has been instrumental in most of the building and maintenance projects at Bodhiana Monastery and at the emerging Hermit Hill property in Serpentine. Ajahn Brahmali's knowledge of the Pali language and of the suttas is excellent. He has been getting more and more popular over the years, traveling around Asia and making the teachings of the Buddha easily accessible to all. Except over the last 2 years, he has to do the Zoom retreats as well as teachings over Zoom and online. Thank you, Ajahn Brahmali, for accepting our invitation. And could we start by asking you to lead a 10-minute guided meditation for us?
Absolutely. It's always a good way to start. So let's do some meditation together by starting out. Okay. So okay, so just make sure you sit comfortably, that you are at ease and that you are relaxed. Close your eyes and just feel your body just as you start out to make sure everything is just right. And just relax as you do your meditation here. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to be done. Just learning to relax and learning to enjoy what is here. And one of the great little insights to use in your meditation is to understand that there is nothing really in the world that is all that interesting here. What is really interesting in life is everything is on the spiritual path. It is what we are doing now. So don't think about the future. Now is what you're doing, what really matters. And as you do this practice, make sure that you look for the happiness of the meditation. It is the happiness that will keep you going and ensure that you have a lot of success on this path. The more you can see the peace as beautiful, as a disentangling from all the world, the more you understand the purpose and why meditation is so powerful. And we are coming to the end already. But before we come to the end, always take just a few seconds to review the meditation. Why is it that meditation sometimes works and sometimes does not work? What are the causes that make this process work properly? Okay.
Thank you, Ajahn Brahmali. Now for the talk on was the Buddha a Hindu?
Okay. Yeah. So.
Yes, Ajahn.
Let's start. So I think you probably know the answer to this question already, I assume. But it is, nevertheless, it is I think, an interesting question to ask, because it brings out some issues about the suttas, about who the Buddha was as a person, that can help us to expand and increase our understanding of the suttas. And the reason actually why this question came up was because there were some people who asked whether the suttas are a copycat of the Vedas. The Vedas, of course, are the ancient Hindu scriptures that the Brahmins in India, they use even in the present day, and they have been around for maybe 3,000-4,000 years. They're really very ancient. Some of those scriptures that long, some of them are much more new. And so it is an interesting question, yeah, for that reason. And so are the suttas just a copy of the Vedas? That was one question. Another question was whether the Kamma, the doctrine of Kamma in Buddhism, is copied from the Brahmins, from the Brahmanical tradition. This was another question. So I thought just join them together and maybe ask if the Buddha is a Hindu, because if he just copied everything from the Vedas, well, then he was basically a Hindu, right? So that's what it comes down to. So it's a good starting point. And it's interesting because sometimes when you look at some of the history of religion, you look at, Christianity, for example, the way Christianity started out in Israel, with Jesus Christ and all of that. Well, the question often comes up, well, was Jesus, was he a Christian? Or was he a Jew? Yeah, and what's the answer? Well, the answer is that he was both. Yeah, he was born a Jew, but obviously he was also a rebel. He was someone who did something differently. So he was both a Christian and a Jew. And then the question arises, well, what about the Buddha? Does that mean the Buddha is both a Hindu and a Buddhist? And if so, to what extent is he a Hindu? To what extent is he a Buddhist? Does this have any meaning here? And these are very important questions, and they help us to understand the suttas in a historical context. And it helps us to understand why the Buddha taught the way he did, why he kept some of the traditions of the time, yeah, etc., etc. So I want to just start off by discussing one theme which is very important in this particular context, and that is the idea of rebirth. Yeah, we all know that rebirth is a very central part of the Buddhist teaching, and we know that because it is found everywhere. It is found in dependent origination. It's part of the the end of the whole Buddhist path. It is, if you like, the purpose of the Buddhist path is really about ending rebirth. But then there are some people who say that, well, it is just something the Buddha took over from the existing culture, because the existing culture believed in rebirth. So the Buddha just accepted these things. Yeah, this is quite a common thing that we hear around the world. And this ties into this idea that the Buddha was really just a Hindu, or he was part of the Brahmanical culture. Yeah, and it took on board many of the ideas. And of course, the more Hindu the Buddha was, the more he would have taken on these ideas. Yeah, so it's kind of not entirely strange thing to ask. I should say before I go on that when we say that the Buddha was a Hindu, actually you can't really say that, because Brahmanism of ancient India is not the same as Hinduism is today. Hinduism is a very developed religion, which is much more developed than the ancient Brahmanism. Yeah, the many differences, like the caste system is very different, and of course the philosophies have developed enormously since then. So it's not exactly the same religion. So we should really ask, was the Buddha part of the Brahmanical system of ancient India? That would be more appropriate. But just to keep it simple, I thought let's just use Hinduism instead. So that culture, that was dominated by the Brahmanical religion, by the Vedas, by that outlook. And of course, according to the Vedas, there was such a thing as rebirth. It existed according to the Vedas. So the Buddha would have known about that because it was a part of the larger culture of India at the time. So it is not entirely impossible that the Buddha may have just taken it on board. But what does the evidence tell us? Well, all the evidence points in a very different direction. There's no reason for actually having this thought. And one of the most important things to me is to remember that the Buddha was a very radical person. He was someone who questioned absolutely everything. He would never take anything on board just on faith, but he would ask whether this is true or not. And the kind of typical example of the Buddha is when he was searching for his awakening. He was kind of traveling around and he was meeting the various teachers. And of course, his first two teachers, very famously found in the suttas, were 𝗓𝗡𝗓𝗪 and 𝗓𝗏𝗓𝗪, which I'm sure you must have heard about. And the Buddha goes to them. And these teachers, they give him a very powerful teaching. They give him a teaching which has to do with the five indriyas. The five indriyas are some of the most powerful teachings you find in the suttas that have to do with the development of the mind, and they are mentioned right there. 𝗓𝗏𝗓𝗪 and 𝗓𝗏𝗓𝗪 taught these five indriyas, not fully, because that would have been impossible, but at least partially, from a Buddhist point of view. And then the Buddha, not the Buddha yet, but the Buddha to be, he asked, well, how can I practice according to these teachings? And then he practiced, and of course, it is well known that he realized very profound states of samadhi. Under one of the teachers, he's supposed to have reached the sphere of nothingness, which is one of the deepest meditation states that is possible to reach. Under the other teacher, the neither perception or non-perception was supposed to be even deeper than the state of nothingness. So these are the most profound things that you can experience as a human being outside of enlightenment itself. There is nothing more profound than this except for enlightenment. So the Buddha is here taught something which the majority of people in the world, if they experience these kind of things, they would say, wow, this is amazing. This is the meaning of life. I have experienced something so profound, so unified, so blissful, so happy, so devoid of suffering, where the ego is completely gone, or almost completely gone. And it's this feeling of being unified with the whole universe. This is it, I found God. Because I found God, I don't need to go any further, because everyone tends to assume that there is a creator God. One of the basic assumptions of humanity throughout history is the idea of a creator God, has always been there. And so you go no further. But of course, the Buddha, he is not happy with just going with the prevailing ideology or the prevailing ideas. So he asked himself, well, is it really the end of the path? Have I achieved what I set out to achieve, which is the end of suffering itself? And he realized that just because you've had some very profound state, something which is so powerful, something which seems to be the answer to the question of the meaning of life. That's what it seems like when you achieve these kind of things. They are very, very profound. And yet the Buddha was so radical. He said, no, this is not the answer. I cannot be sure that this is the way out. All I know is that I had a magnificent experience. I haven't really found any certainty about this being the end of things. So the Buddha rejected that. He rejected the most profound experience you can have as a human being. Now, one of the, I think, important points here also is that 𝗓𝗏𝗓𝗪 and 𝗓𝗏𝗓𝗪, they were also part of the Brahmanical tradition. They were part of this larger part of the ascetic side, if you like, of the Brahmanical tradition. So the Buddha here rejected their views, and he said, this is not the end of the path. So this is the nature of the Buddha, always inquiring, always asking, always never really being satisfied with anything. And then he is supposed to have taken on faith that there is such a thing as rebirth without checking it out for himself. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't fit with how we see the Buddha in the suttas. You can discern the personality of the Buddha in the suttas. He was a radical. He was someone who was not afraid of going against things if things were wrong. He was always looking for truth. Truth was the only thing that he was interested in. And that's what he searched for. And of course, if you are going to take the sutta at face value, which I think we should do, then he says that his awakening experience was much more than just having profound meditation. It was about the insight into rebirth. It was about the insight into karma. It was about the insight into devas. There are a number of suttas where he talks about having discussion with the devas and understanding the whole universe and the whole world as it actually is. So when the Buddha talks about awakening here, he talks about awakening in a very broad, a very wide sense, including all of these things that have to do with the universe and the world as we know it. All of these things are included in that. And the Buddha never taught anything that was outside of his experience. He never taught anything that he wasn't sure about himself, that he had seen with his own insight. And this is kind of the teacher that we have. So this is a very important foundation for understanding the connection between the Vedas and the suttas. And that is that the Buddha only taught, he may have taught things that were similar to the Vedas, but only if he knew it was true, only if he knew that the Vedas had already got it right, then he might teach it. So we can expect there to be a lot of difference between the Vedas and the suttas, because the Buddha questioned everything. We can also expect that there will be some similarities. There are areas where the suttas and the Vedas overlap, where they have the same kind of worldview because they happen to have it right with the Vedas. Some things obviously are going to be right. And of course, in many ways, the Buddha was also a product of that culture, in the sense that he would have used that language. He used a large number of terms that existed already in that language. So the suttas are full of these terms that come from the Vedic culture. He took on many of the habits that they had in that society. The fact of wearing robes, shaving your head, these kind of things. So he was part of the culture. So all the things that were conducive, that were useful, he would take on board in this way. Maybe some of the rituals he would take on board. A typical ritual is the cremation ritual. Cremation is the standard way of dealing with dead bodies in Buddhism. And it's the same way as they also have in the Vedic tradition. They also use cremation. Some of these things were taken on from the earlier culture. But whenever the Buddha thought something was wrong, then of course he would not take it on board. Now, one of the interesting ways of seeing the difference between the Vedas and the suttas is actually to read a little bit. And if you ever have a chance, I would recommend you maybe just to read a little bit from the Vedas, because when you read a little bit from the Vedas and you read a little bit from the suttas and you compare, you will see that the difference is enormous. It is not just a small difference, it is a massive difference between these Vedas and the suttas. I should say straight away, be upfront, I don't have very much experience with reading the Vedas. I've read a little bit here and a little bit there, but actually very, very small amount. So my impression is very superficial, but you don't really need all that much of an impression. You get an impression very quickly by reading a little bit here and a little bit there. And I think there was a wise person who said some time ago that if you're going to learn something, then only learn it superficially. Don't learn it too much, because sometimes we become like experts in certain fields. But the question is, how much of an expert do you need to be? How much do you need to know of the Vedas? Well, actually, you don't really need to know that much about the Vedas. If you know a little bit, if you know enough to understand that this can be put to one side, well, that's sufficient. The only thing that we need to be experts in is the purification of the mind. That's where we really have to try really hard and go all the way. But everything else, don't never be too much of an expert, because you're likely to waste a lot of time. I think that's kind of a very wise saying. Always know things halfway. That's usually good enough. Unless it is your profession, perhaps, or something like that is a bit different. So anyway, so when you read the Vedas, yeah, and you compare it to the suttas, you realize that there is two completely different worlds that you enter when you see these things. First of all, you notice that the language is very different. Yeah, things like the grammar, the words that are used, the sentences, the Vedas are largely verse, but the suttas are largely prose. Yeah, so the Vedas have a very different feel to them. Everything is quite different. And then on top of that, there is just the content. The content is enormously different. The content in the Vedas is very poetic. Yeah, it is about a lot of superstitions in there, a lot of magic in there. It's very interesting. If you want to learn how to do black magic, then the Vedas are a very good source. It talks about magic and all kinds of things. Don't learn black magic. I warn you. I'm just saying, if anyone is desperate, that's a good source. And so it is a very different world. It's a world which is very kind of enchanted, very magical, very different. Nothing is very clear cut. Everything is talked in a roundabout fashion. Everything is similes. Everything is metaphors. Everything is allegories. You have to interpret everything. Yeah, and everything is really difficult to understand. It kind of works on the emotions. It doesn't work on the rational things at all. And then you come to the suttas. Yeah, you come to the word of the Buddha. And it's a different language, different grammar, different sentences. You understand this is a completely different kind of text. It is logical, it is coherent, everything fits together beautifully. You recognize yourself in these teachings. Yeah, you read these teachings and you can see that the Buddha is talking to you. He's talking to real human beings. You can straight away understand what he's saying about. He's talking about desires. He's talking about ill will. He's talking about being kind and these things leading to happiness. And we all can understand these things to some extent straight away. Yeah, there's a very different feel to these things. And when you see that, when you see this difference, you understand that there are two very different cultures. One is the culture of ancient India, which was steeped in all of these kind of wonderful and magical things. Yeah, much of the ancient world seems to have been quite magical in this way. So much mythology, so much legend, stories coming from the ancient past. Nobody knows where these stories come from. And then you have Buddhism, which is an entirely different culture. It's a culture created by the Buddha from scratch, yeah, which has a completely different feel to it. And this is really, really fascinating here. Yeah, and it shows you that no, the Buddhism and the Vedas are not copycats of each other at all. I hope the person who asked that question is listening to this, so you get the answer. They're completely different things. And by the way, this is also exactly the same reason why we know that things like the Abhidhamma is not the same as the suttas, was not taught by the Buddha. We know that for exactly the same reason. Because if you go to the Abhidhamma, you realize the language is very different. Yeah, the vocabulary used is very different. The ideas that are promoted are very different. The context is very different. You understand that you are dealing with a very different kind of text. Just like in the English language, if you read a text from 400 years ago and a text today, you understand that it is different. Yeah, it does not come from the same time period. You know, if you try to write like William Shakespeare, you probably fail because it's just too difficult. The language is too different. And we see the same thing happening again and again. And that's why it is very, very obvious that the Abhidhamma and the suttas were not both taught by the Buddha. The Buddha taught the suttas. The Abhidhamma are a later development. It's very kind of obvious when you understand things, when you see things in this way. So this is the difference between the Vedas and the suttas. Yeah, and it is not just the difference between the Vedas and the suttas. It is in fact the difference between the Buddhist teachings and all other religious teachings. I don't know if you have read the Bible at all, or you have tried to read the Bible. I don't know if you try, whether you maybe fell asleep sometimes. I don't know. I've tried to read the Bible, and I got really, really bored very quickly because there are some interesting parts, but a lot of it to me didn't make any sense to me at all. I just could not, some of the long lines of father to son, this was this father and his family lineages and all this kind of stuff. And you can read other spiritual texts, like maybe modern spiritual texts, or you can read the Quran, as I just mentioned. If you compare all of these texts to the Buddhist suttas, there's something about the Buddhist suttas that are very, very special and very unique because they are so practical. They have to do with the development of the mind. They are directly related to the meaning of life itself. They tell you very clearly what it is that you have to do. They tell you about the world and ask you to practice in accordance with that. It is very easy, straightforward, usually, not always. There are some suttas that are a bit more difficult, but usually very straightforward and easy to understand. Yeah? And this, to me, is what makes the sutta so extraordinary, special, so different from any other spiritual tradition. And I'm always, one of the things that I find the most amazing is why aren't more people Buddhist? We have the best spiritual scriptures in the world, the most profound spiritual scriptures in the world. We have something completely unique, and still people are not Buddhist. Why? This is what I'd like to know, because I think if we can understand the why, adjust the teachings to suit the modern audience a bit better, perhaps, I don't know. So this is we have something very, very unique in Buddhism. I think it's very important to remember that, because when we recall that, I think we appreciate more the value of what we have, because it is really so special and so different from what anyone else has. So that is the kind of a little bit of the background. Yeah, if the texts themselves are so different, then of course it means that the very religion itself also must be very different. They have a very different source. They come from very different things. But as I mentioned before, there are a few things within both the Vedas and also in the suttas that are similar. And I want to talk about one of those similar things a little bit. And this is a little bit of an extension of the retreat I gave with the BF quite recently about what can we learn from the Devas. Because one of the strange things about the suttas, which always caught my eye, which I thought very much deals with this idea of the Vedas and the suttas overlapping with each other. And that is the fact that when you read some of the texts, especially in the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses of the Buddha, the first two of the connected discourses is the Devata Samyutta, the connected discourses on Devas, the gods or whatever. And the other one is called the Devaputta Samyutta, the connected discourses on also the gods. Devaputtas are just like gods as well, maybe subsidiary gods or whatever you want to call it. And then when you read those suttas, it becomes very quickly very obvious that a large part of the content there is very similar to what you find in the Vedas. And one of the things that you find is the names of the Devas are the same. So for example, in the suttas, you have Sakka. Sakka is also known as Devinda. Devinda means the Lord of the gods. And in Sanskrit, God is called Indra, very important god in the Sanskrit tradition. Then there is Prajapati, Prajapati in the Vedic and Sanskrit tradition, Prajapati in the Pali tradition, also found in the suttas, also found in the Vedas. Prajapati literally means something like the Lord of people, the Lord of of all beings. The Praja is the kind of progeny, or the population, if you like, also found in both traditions. Then you have gods like Vishnu. There is a god in the Pali tradition called Venu. Venu is very likely the same as Vishnu. Then you have Siva in the Pali, which quite possibly is the same as Shiva in the Sanskrit tradition. Then you have Varuna. Varuna is another of the ancient Vedic gods. And I did a count once of the number of gods that are the same in the Vedas as in the Pali, and it adds up to quite a large number, somewhere between 10 and 15 gods that are in common between the two traditions. And then I started wondering, well, what is going on here? Why are we as Buddhists kind of reading about all these Vedic gods? Have we been tricked? Has someone inserted all kind of dodgy material into the suttas? Do we need to throw these suttas out? Is this authentic? Does it make any sense? And it doesn't stop with the idea of the names of the gods. It's also the case that many of the stories that you find there, you find the wars between the Asuras, the Asuras and the Devas. And this idea of the war between the Asuras and the Devas, they are found, it's found everywhere in human mythology. It's found in ancient India, but it's also found in Iran, in the Iranian tradition, where you had Ahura Mazda, famous Iranian or Persian deity, which later on became the Asuras in the Indian kind of pantheon of gods. You had the similar kind of things in Europe. The gods were always at war, always fighting with each other. You wonder why anyone would want to go to heaven. They're all fighting with each other up there. In the Nordic tradition is the worst. And that's kind of my kind of forefathers who kind of believed in this kind of stuff. They would just drink and fight in heaven. You wonder why anyone would want to go to heaven if all they do is drink and fight. But anyway, that's what they did. And so all of these things are also found in the suttas. So what is going on here? What is happening here? And I think what is happening is that the Devas, the idea of gods, this is something that is found almost everywhere in human societies. You find the idea of gods in ancient India. If you go to China, you find a lot of gods in the Chinese tradition. If you go to Europe, lots of gods in the old European tradition. If you go to Africa, again, you have lots of gods. This idea of gods of various qualities and varying is something that's found everywhere in humanity. All human cultures have this idea. So when the Buddha takes on board this idea of gods, what he is doing, he's just taking on board an idea that existed in all human cultures. Why did this idea exist in all human cultures? And I think it is just the same as when other ideas exist in all human cultures, is that we are probably tapping into a deeper reality. Sometimes people have a grander vision. They have some kind of insight into the larger world. And these kind of insights can happen in any area, anywhere, any culture, any society. But we tend to tap into the same kind of underlying reality. So I think all of these civilizations, sometimes it is about rebirth, it's about God, it's about near-death experiences. These exist in all cultures. And because of that, the Buddha is just saying that, well, this is true. These gods exist. All of these cultures are tapping into an underlying reality. Because it is true, I also have to have it part of the Buddhist traditions. So devas are real. Why take on board the idea? Why use the same names as you have in the Veda tradition? Well, the names are not important. What is important is the actual devas. The names are just ways of talking about these gods. We might as well use the gods, the ancient Hindu names. We could also use the names of the Iranian tradition, maybe the Chinese names. That's probably too hard to pronounce for the Indians, probably not the Chinese ones, but maybe the Greek gods, because they were already known in ancient India. The names are irrelevant. You might as well use those names because the names are just signifying certain aspects of those gods, and the gods are there. And I think that is also the reason why many of the other things to do with the devas are there in the suttas. The idea that they fight with each other. Well, probably the gods do fight with each other. This is probably the reality. And that's why they took it into the suttas. And it's kind of off-putting, isn't it? And this was one of the things we talked about during this idea, what can we learn from the devas? It's kind of off-putting when you see that the world of the gods is so similar to the human world. They are fighting with each other. They are dying. they are sorrowing and grieving over people who, go the wrong way and do the wrong thing or whatever. It is just so similar, and for that reason also so problematic in many ways. So I think that is the reason why you find these similarities, because actually it is the same underlying reality that we are all tapping into, the idea of gods. That is one side of the issue. There's another side of this issue of gods, and that is, how should we relate to these gods? This is another important.
Ajahn, I think your wire, your mic has problems.
Okay, can you hear me? No?
Yeah, the last two sentences we missed.
You missed? Okay, something happening then. I'm not sure. Okay, so
thank you.
Just let me know, Eiling, if it happens again, and I'll just try to recapitulate. So what I'm saying is just that so we can agree that there are gods. All traditions kind of agree with that. So the question then is, well, what is the difference between the Vedas and the Suttas in terms of gods? Because one thing is the fact that there are gods, but the other question is, how do we relate to these gods? And that might actually be quite different. And so one of the things that you find in the ancient Vedas, what you find in almost all religious traditions around the world, is the idea of making offerings to the gods. Because if you make an offering to the god, the idea is that then the gods will look after you. It's a very, very common view around the world. It's this kind of relationship that we have between these powerful gods, human beings, gods working together to make sure the world kind of goes around in a good way. Gods look after us, and then we look after the gods by doing services to the gods, if you like. And this is where the Buddhist tradition is quite different, because Buddhism doesn't really talk about doing offerings to the gods. It is not an important part of the Buddhist tradition. You might say that there are a couple of places in the suttas where it does talk about offerings to the gods. It is true. It is found in a couple of places in the Anguttara Nikaya. It talks about doing oblations for gods and these kind of things. But it is not really expanded on. It is just contracted into two very, very small suttas. And I must admit, I have my doubts whether these things really are Buddhist ideas, whether they are ideas that have kind of crept in from the outside. Sometimes we do get ideas that creep in from the outside. And I'm not convinced that these actually are Buddhist ideas. They sound too much like Hinduism. They sound too much like other religions to really make any sense. It is never expanded on. It is just mentioned as one of a number of items on the list. It doesn't give much confidence that these are real Buddhist ideas. If they are important Buddhist ideas, they will be expanded on. Something will be talked about these things. And it kind of makes sense, if you think about it. Because if we make an offering to the gods, will the gods be interested in our offerings? What can we give to the gods anyway? The gods have it much better than we have. That's the whole purpose of becoming a god. They have better food, they have better clothes, they have better looking partners, they have better houses, everything is better. What can we give them? Nothing, right? You make an offering to the god, they say, go away, I don't want to see your offering. Your offering doesn't mean anything to me. Keep it to yourself, feed your own children, whatever. I'm not interested in these kind of things. It kind of doesn't make any sense when you think about it, that we should be able to do offerings to the gods. And sometimes this idea of doing offerings to the gods gets completely out of hand. You look at the idea of the history of religion around the world, especially in Hinduism, but also elsewhere. And you see there is so much sacrifice that is completely crazy that people do. Sacrificing animals, it is very, very common in Hinduism. And Ajahn Brahmali tells the story once of he was in Nepal, and in Nepal he was on this guided tour. And as he was walking on this guided tour, he got a bit bored, so he kind of went through a side door into this kind of big open area. And when he went in there, he said he had this terrible feeling. It felt like a really dark place, this door that he went through. So he came out, and then he asked the tour guide, well, what's this place? It's a place of sacrifice. Yeah, so this is still going on in some of the Hindu countries in the world today, sacrificing of large number of animals. And in other places, yeah, it's quite common also to sacrifice human beings. Very common in the world, yeah, to make the gods happy. But what kind of gods is it that accepts human sacrifice? Must be some really dodgy gods. Yeah, I wouldn't want to believe in a god that accepts human sacrifice. It just sounds terrible. I would like to have a god who is nice, who is kind, who has compassion and understanding. That's my kind of god. I don't want to have these dodgy, dark gods that kind of do all kind of dodgy stuff. And even if they exist, well, I'm going to place my bets with some other god. Yeah, if I'm going to place my bets with any god at all. So I'm just going to forget about those dodgy gods. And of course, the Buddha said we should not do this kind of thing. It's the wrong kind of sacrifice. It has no merit. It doesn't lead anywhere. So this is part of the problem with a human kind of relationship to the gods. So what is the right relationship with the gods according to Buddhism? And this is where Buddhism goes away from Hinduism. Yeah, the roots, the idea of gods comes from the Vedas. It's the same in Hinduism as it is in Buddhism. But how we relate to the gods is very different. What the Buddha said is that if you want the gods to look after you, if you want to be dear to the gods, as the Buddha says it, you should be kind. You should be virtuous. You should have a mind of loving kindness. And if the more you build up your virtue, the kinder you are as a person, the more likely it is that the gods will look after you and they will help you out if it is necessary. And you can see why, because the gods are already highly developed. Yeah, these are beings that have a lot of good qualities in them. When they see that human beings are acting in the right way, it will make them happy. They want to encourage us. They want to support us in doing what is right. And they will, for that reason, they will have a sense of metta and kindness towards you. It's the same thing in the human realm. Yeah, who are the people that we feel most connected to and have most goodwill towards? It is other kind people that we feel that for. Yeah, it's kind of natural. You feel attracted to people who are kind because you feel safe. You feel that you can learn something from them. You feel that you are taking on board some of their qualities just by being around them. So of course, that is quite natural. So that is the right way of thinking about the gods. Yeah, I would say don't rely on the gods at all, because the gods, who knows what they are thinking? Maybe they will look after you, maybe they won't. It's just too hard to know. But if you want to maximize the chance of the gods looking after you, the right way is to be kind. Then the gods will look at you with kindly eyes. Yeah, then they will look after you. Have a pure heart. A pure-hearted person tends to be safe in this world. In some of these suttas, it says that you are free if you are very virtuous, if you have a mind of loving kindness. Weapons cannot touch you, and you will be dear to the gods. Poisons cannot touch you. And it's kind of interesting. Why is it that poisons and weapons cannot touch you if you are very pure-hearted? And I think maybe the answer to that is that the gods look after you. So the gods kind of stop things from happening, yeah, if in certain situations. It's possible, at least one possible explanation here. This is the way to do it. And there are some very interesting stories around the world, yeah, when these kind of things happen, where people seem to be looked after by the gods. The gods look after them. And you have in the kind of European tradition, in the Christian tradition, you have the idea of guardian angels, yeah, angels which come and kind of look after you. That seems to be very similar to the idea of devas that take care of you, in a sense. And I remember there's one story that I read many, many years ago. This was an American woman, and she called herself Peace Pilgrim. I don't know if you have heard of her, but she was going around back in the 1980s. And this was obviously a very pure woman, a woman with a very, very pure heart. And she just walked around the United States, and she walked on foot, yeah, from the East Coast to the West Coast of the US. She didn't have any belongings. She just lived on the generosity of strangers all the way. And she had this enormous amount of compassion and kindness inside of herself. Yeah? And this was what drove her on. And she was always supported wherever she went. She was obviously someone with a very, very high degree of purity. In all societies, we find these kind of people who are very pure. And she told the story of one day when she was driving a car. And she was driving this car, and she was going down a steep hill or something. And at a certain point, as she was going down this steep hill, she lost control of the car. And the moment she lost control of the car, she thought she was going to die, because it was a steep hill and she would have driven into other cars or driven into a building or whatever, because the car got out of control. And the moment the car got out of control, she said that there was someone else taking charge of the car. Suddenly, someone took over the car and got it under control again and drove it into safety. And it's one of those stories that I always found fascinating. This was this very, very pure person. And I would guess that she, when she had this kind of experience, yeah, it was probably a real thing. And I think this might very well be one of those cases of the gods looking after you. Yeah, when things go really wrong and you're not able to look after yourself anymore, it feels like a supernormal power suddenly takes over. And of course, I think this is the devas that do that. The devas kind of come into your life all of a sudden, and they take over what you are doing. So it's fascinating, and I think these are experiences that people have around the world every now and again. So one of the reasons why I talk so much about this is because I think it is an important issue also in modern Buddhism. If you look around the Buddhist world, you will see that there are large numbers of people, especially in Buddhist countries, that do precisely this. They do offerings to the devas, and they make sure the devas look after them. And we are very influenced in many parts of the Buddhist world by the Vedic culture in this way. Yeah, the Vedic culture has come on board. We do the Vedic thing, but we don't do the Buddhist thing here. It's kind of strange, isn't it? How we kind of go back and we do the Vedic thing rather than the Buddhist thing here. We have lost sight of what actually we are supposed to be doing as Buddhists, and instead we do the Vedic things. And you know, examples of that would be in places like Sri Lanka, for example. In Sri Lanka, it is very common, yeah, for people both to go to monasteries and also go to Hindu shrines. And they go to monasteries to do the Buddhist thing, they take the 5 precepts, and then they go to the Hindu shrines to pray to the gods and to do offerings to the gods, because they want the gods to look after them. Yeah, they have forgotten that the Buddhist way of making the gods look after you is not really to do offerings to the gods. The Buddhist way is to live well. You don't need to go to the Hindu temple. The Buddhist temple is plenty enough. But I guess people are looking for a kind of safety. Yeah, they want to kind of spread their bets. So just like in a casino, you spread your bets around a little bit and make sure that you kind of have all your bases covered. I guess that's the idea here. But actually, we are moving back to the Vedic ideas. It's as if the Vedic ideas that were rejected by the Buddha are creeping back again into Buddhism. Same thing in Thailand. If you go to see Thai culture, one of the interesting things that you see in Thai culture is the taking on board of a vast amount of Vedic rituals. Yeah, all these rituals taken on board from the Vedic culture, and especially around the royalty and the aristocracy of Thailand. They use Vedic rituals to kind of make something grand, yeah, make it really a big deal, what they are doing with royalty and the people who are considered important in Thai society. Buddhism doesn't have many rituals. Yeah, Buddhism rituals are not that important. In Buddhism, if we have rituals, they serve a certain purpose. We don't do rituals for the sake of it. And yet these Vedic ideas are creeping back again into Buddhism. And we have to be very careful because unless we are what will happen is that we kind of gradually, slide back into the Vedic way of doing things, and we forget the Buddhist way of doing things. And the idea of rituals is actually a very important point in case. Yeah, this is happening all time in Buddhism, where we do all kind of rituals for all kind of reasons, and sometimes we need to be careful with all of these rituals. A little bit of rituals is fine, especially if we do it in the right way. But we need to remember that the Buddha said, he said things like bathing in the river Ganges is not going to get rid of your bad karma. The way to live your life is to do rituals in a purposeful way. And so you bow down to the Buddha, which is great. And of course, because then we are aspiring for something greater. We are trying to see the qualities in the Buddha and understand that these qualities are potentially also inside of us. And when we do these things with sincerity, they have a purpose. But we have to be careful not to take it too far. Sometimes I complain to Ajahn Brahm and I say, Ajahn Brahm, why do you do all this water sprinkling all the time? And I'm really naughty. Yeah, I like to be naughty. And I think it's okay if Ajahn Brahm wants to do a bit of water sprinkling. It's probably innocent enough. But sometimes I am concerned that we kind of do too many rituals and we forget about the real things that Buddhism is about. And when we do that, we are sliding back into the Vedic culture, which the Buddha actually rejected in this respect. We need to put meaning into things. Do rituals, sure, but make sure that they are meaningful when you do that. So anyway, the main point was just to talk about the idea of devas, and the idea of gods. And there's one more thing that I like to point out, because I think it is a very interesting thing. There's another thing which kind of distinguishes Buddhism from the Vedas, and that is the fact, the idea of many gods versus a single god. The majority of religions around the world, they have like a single god, usually a creator god, a kind of eternal reality which is always there. That is true in Hinduism, it is true in not Buddhism, in Christianity, in Islam, in Judaism. Yeah, the idea of a creator god. And sometimes we will hear things like the idea of a creator god is a more sophisticated idea than the idea of many different gods. The idea of polytheism, in other words, the idea of having many gods, people will say it's a kind of ancient idea that is very primitive, that came from primitive societies where they tried to explain the forces of nature by these gods. And then as civilization became more advanced, we moved from many gods to having a single god. A single god is considered more of a sophisticated idea, the idea of many gods. But I think it's the other way around. I think the idea of many gods is more sophisticated than the idea of a single god. And the reason why I think that, and the reason why I think it's actually exactly the other way around, is because the idea of many gods is something that we can all know in a certain way. Yeah, if we investigate the world in the right way, if we gain access to a deep state of meditation, these things are actually knowable, at least in principle, because gods, they are just like us. They are temporary. They last for a certain amount of time. They have a limited amount of power. They did not create the universe. And because they are very much like us, if you can understand another human being, you can also understand these gods. All you have to do is be able to see that reality. But the idea of a creator God is completely outside of experience. It is not something that you can ever experience. You cannot, first of all, you cannot ever know that some powerful deity created the universe. That is unknowable. Maybe you can find a deity which tells you, I created the universe, but that doesn't really, that's not, that's just someone saying something to someone else. It doesn't mean anything. But actually experiencing that is impossible. In the same way, if we assume that a deity which created the universe is eternal, like we do with the gods usually, eternity is not something we can experience. It's impossible to experience the idea of a universal God. Yeah, a God which is eternal, because all experiences are by definition limited. We cannot know eternity. So the idea of a creator God, and whether it is the Brahma of the Hindus, the God of the Christians, or the Muslims, or whatever, it is an idea. It is a manufactured thing. It is a metaphysical principle. It is something that we have come up with from somewhere, but it is not something that can be experienced. So whenever someone tells you that they have experienced a creator God or the God of Christianity, yeah, you will know that actually they have experienced something. They have experienced something which has some very powerful qualities, but they cannot have experienced that eternal God, the creator God, which they often talk about in those religions. Why? Because such an experience cannot exist by definition. It is always going to be just an idea in people's head. So for me, this means that the idea of many gods, of having a kind of polytheistic world, is actually much more real, because it is possible to experience these things, whereas the idea of a single God is actually not even possible to experience. So it turns things a bit upside down, and that is kind of beautiful. Sometimes we need to think differently, and that's why I bring this up. So just to kind of give you this slightly different experience. But before I come to the end, I want to talk about one more thing here. And this is really the most important thing of all. And I have just been talking about the Brahma, the Mahabrahma, the kind of creator God of Hinduism, the eternal God, completely omnipotent, yeah, which is always there, the kind of the expression of loving kindness in the world, yeah. And the most important thing to understand about the difference between the Vedic religion and Buddhism is that the Buddha rejected that idea. This is what the very powerful insight of the Buddha, this is what the awakening experience really is all about. It is about the rejection of anything eternal in the world. There is no such thing as eternal things, eternal principles. This is what the Buddha discovered on his night of awakening here. So the very foundation, this idea of, you can call it a universal God, you can call it the ground of consciousness, you can call it the kind of the founding principle of reality. You can give these things many, many different names. This is what was rejected by the Buddha. There is no such permanent principle that underlies reality. And in this way, Buddhism is the most radical, the most extraordinary religion in the world, because there is no other religion like that. This is what distinguishes Buddhism from everything else, the fact that we reject all permanent principles. There's nothing there that you can hold on to as permanent. And this is incredibly important. Yeah, this is incredibly important because the power of that idea, the power of the idea of a permanent principle in the world, we are all longing for that. We all want there to be something permanent that we can hold on to. Yeah, this is the thing about attachment. We attach to things and they're all impermanent. But if we can find that one thing which is permanent in the world, then we can finally attach. There's no danger anymore because it is always there. So it's such a powerful draw because we're all leaning towards that. We want to exist. We want it to be something. So our mind will tend to incline towards permanent things. And that is why the majority of people in the world are theists. They believe in a creator God. They believe in this underlying principle in the universe. Call it the universal mind. Call it the ground of consciousness, whatever you want to call it. We're all leaning in that direction. And because we are all leaning in that direction, because this means so much to us, it means that as Buddhists too, we tend to lean there. And sometimes when we hear that there is no such thing, we think, wait a minute, maybe I'm in the wrong religion. Yeah, I want it to be something here. I want it to be something permanent. I don't want it to be nothing here. And then what happens is that very commonly we sneak ideas of a permanent mind, of a permanent God into the Buddhist teachings, and they become part of Buddhism. And when you start to look around the world. You look at Mahayana Buddhism. I'm talking about the Buddhist world now. Outside of Buddhism, of course, we know what it is like, but in the Buddhist world, you look at large parts of Mahayana Buddhism, and they have this idea of an underlying reality, yeah, which is always there, supporting everything else. If you go to Theravada Buddhism, you find the same thing here. Yeah, you start looking around and you will see that actually the idea of there being something permanent in the world actually is quite a common idea even within Theravada circles. And yet, despite that, because we don't understand our history here, because we don't understand the distinction between the Vedas and Buddhism, because we don't understand the things that the Buddha rejected from the very beginning because of his awakening experience, because we don't understand that, we take these things in without realizing that we're contradicting everything the Buddha went against, everything the Buddha rejected. And this shows you how important it is to have a little bit of sense of history here, a little bit of sense of what these teachings actually are about, what they are reactions to. And very often you will, you find people who say, oh, don't read too much, don't kind of waste your time by reading the suttas or whatever. But a little bit of education is required, because if we have no education, we have nothing to stand on, we have nothing to fall back on. And if someone tells us the wrong thing, we have no idea, no way of evaluating what is going on. So this becomes the most important thing of all. To understand the Buddhist idea of non-self, we can really only fully understand it in the context of what the Buddha rejected 2,500 years ago. Yeah, the Buddha said, there is no such thing as an eternal principle. There's nothing there to hold on to. This is the only place where you can find liberation, where you can find true happiness, is actually by rejecting that. If you hold on to that idea, all it is going to do is to make you keep on going around in the circle of life and death, around and around and around, because you're grasping onto something which does not actually exist, this idea of an eternal mind. So keep that in mind. Yeah, try to be clear about where the Buddha actually did go in different directions from the early Vedic teachings. And as you do that, it will be a very powerful guide to you to kind of head you in the right direction. So that is it for now. I was going to say much more, but I got to stop there, I think. So I'll leave it at there, and then we can maybe have some questions and things, Eiling. So
yes, thank you, Ajahn Brahmali. Let's ask the floor. Any questions from the floor first? No? Okay, then I'll go to some of the questions. There are just a few questions. First question is, Ajahn Brahmali, how powerful can a God be?
Whoa, pretty powerful. So the thing is that the Buddhist, it depends on, the really the right answer to that is how powerful can the mind be? Yeah, this is really the right answer, because the mind, depending on the purity of the mind, that is where you get reborn. So if you can make the mind incredibly powerful, then that is the same kind of power that you will have as a god in these kind of various realms. So some of these gods, they will be, extraordinarily powerful because they have very powerful minds, and they will be able to do all of those things that you can read about in the suttas, read other people's minds and travel through space and all this kind of stuff. All of those things they will be able to do. So it is really the mind that you develop in this life that shows you the limit of the power of these kind of gods. But very often, they talk in the suttas about the various Brahmas, and they seem to be like responsible for different kind of areas of the universe. So you have some Brahmas who are responsible for maybe a solar system. This is the solar system Brahma. Yeah, he kind of takes charge of this solar system. And then you have even greater Brahmas who can maybe look after the galaxy. Yeah, and the further out you go, the more powerful these beings are. They kind of overlook these large large areas of the world, and this is kind of becomes their realm, yeah, and they are kind of overlooking this whole aspects of the universe. There is a very interesting scientific paper that was came out a few years ago, which looked at the structure of the universe, and it compared the structure of the universe to the structure of the brain. And what they found is that when you looked at the structure of the universe in great detail, they're taking into account all the matter and force fields and everything that exists in the universe. And if you looked at the distribution of all this matter and force field and everything, and you compared it to the distribution of neurons in the mind, the map you get is almost exactly the same. Yeah, it is very, very similar. And they were saying, well, this is almost too similar to be a coincidence. How can there be such similarity between the cosmos and the human brain? And maybe the idea here is that, well, the human brain is kind of a picture of human consciousness. This is what human consciousness looks like. Yeah? So maybe the universe is a picture of the consciousness of Mahabrahma, the great Brahma. Maybe it looks like that. It is a material equivalent of the human brain. I don't know. It's a crazy idea, but it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you, Ajahn. Another question. Thank you, Ajahn, for an interesting talk. May I ask Ajahn whether it is appropriate for Buddhists to seek the help of gods or devas when disturbed by unseen beings or negative forces? What should a Buddhist do when he or she encounters such situations?
I wouldn't really recommend to ask for the gods. I mean, it depends on the situation. It depends on how desperate you are. And sometimes when we are really desperate, we want to try everything we can. Yeah. So if you are really desperate, maybe you can do that. If it makes you feel better, or it makes you feel that you are doing everything you can try. But I wouldn't really recommend it. I don't think it is the right way to do things. The best thing to do is that if you have these kind of problems, is to maybe go to a good monk like Ajahn Brahm, or a good nun, or even a good lay person, get a blessing from them, yeah, and sit in their presence for a while. And because that, when you are in the presence of a mind that is highly developed, when there is a lot of metta available, then very often these beings, they have the opportunity to achieve what they want to achieve, and then they move on. So, for example, sometimes we do blessings. Ajahn Brahm likes to say that we are ghost busters in the monastery. So someone said, we have a ghost in our restaurant. Please come and bust the ghost. So we don't actually bust ghosts, because busting is too harsh. But what we do instead, yeah, we are kind to the ghosts. So we go to the restaurant, we chant the Metta Sutta, and we say to the ghost, please, time for you to move on. No need to be here anymore. And very often, the negative energy in that restaurant very often will disappear simply by doing that much. Because this is what these beings are after. They're after kindness, they're after care, they're after love and compassion and understanding and all of these kind of things. So in the same way, if you have something dark in your life that is following you around or whatever, be kind to it. Yeah, say, ghost, I have compassion for you. I wish you everything well, but maybe time for you to leave, and move on somewhere else. And if you can't do it yourself, come to Ajahn Brahm, come to someone that you respect who has very powerful qualities, and they will be able to help you to move in that direction. But the gods, I think it is very unlikely that the gods will be able to help you, because it's not usually what gods do.
Thank you, Ajahn. A comment by, I think, a Sri Lankan Chandana. Dear Venerable Sir, I fully agree with you about Buddhists in Sri Lanka. The reason may be that in Sri Lanka had countless invitations from India and was under Hindu leaders for a long period of time. They worshipped Hindu gods and has built shrines for Hindu gods in Buddhist temples. In a way, they coexisted for a long period of time. This has become a cultural norm rather than a real belief. Okay, that's another, that's just a comment. One question is, Ajahn, what if Metta Sutta doesn't work, as the negative forces is vindictive kind?
They always work, yeah. They always work in one way or another. Being kind is always the most powerful way, regardless of what happens. And if it doesn't work for the other being, it works for you. Yeah, it makes your life better. And so there's always a good outcome of these kind of things. So there is never any place in Buddhism for violence or harshness or anything like that. This is not a Buddhist principle at all. All beings in the world, all they are looking for is happiness. If you can provide that happiness for another being by being kind, by having metta, that is what they're looking for. It may not work straight away, but it will work over time. Yeah, and then you will get rid of any kind of difficult thing. So please, the most important thing in life is to do what is right. Good people always have a positive future. It's one of those interesting things right now in the world. Yeah, we have so many international problems with climate change and all kinds of things happening in the world. The COVID, of course, COVID hopefully disappearing a bit now. But there's all these kind of problems in the world. And the answer people want to know is, what about the future? Where are we going? And the answer is that if you are a good person, you will always have a good future. That is the answer. It doesn't matter so much about the world. Forget about the world. The world is out of control. You don't know what's going to happen to the world. Are we going to be able to deal with climate change? Maybe a little bit, maybe not at all. It's just very uncertain. So what we have to do is deal with those things that we can deal with, which is your own life. Have metta, have kindness. Never allow yourself to succumb to those darker forces and become a little bit of that force yourself.
Thank you, Ajahn. Now we have more questions from the online people. Dear Ajahn, what is the difference between Buddhism and the Vedas in terms of the concept of karma?
Okay, yeah, thank you for reminding me of that, because I had intended to speak about that, but suddenly the hour was finished, and when the hour is finished, you just have to stop. So because that was one of the important questions that actually was there. And the answer is that it's a very different conception, and it's very important to understand this. This is one of those areas where the Buddha had a real insight into nature of reality. And in the Vedic ideas, karma is just action, it's just ritual. Yeah, so in the Vedas, it is always a question of what is the right ritual at a particular time. When someone dies, you have to do the ritual in a certain way. You have to chant certain gatha, certain verses to make sure that the ceremony happens in the right way. That is how the Brahmins made their living, because they were the only ones who knew those gathas, those verses. Those verses were spoken in ancient Sanskrit. It was a language that no one else understood except for these Brahmins. And so they kept these things secret, and that's how they made their money, because other people had to pay them to say and do this kind of funeral rituals. So the ancient idea of karma was like the power of action itself, without any kind of ethical or moral content. That is how the ancient Indian society actually worked. And then, of course, the Buddha came along, and he said one kind of very important sentence. This is one of the things you find in the suttas. And he says that Chaitana ahang bhikkhave kammang vadami. Very famous statement from the suttas. And it means that it is intention, monks, that I call karma. The idea that we can just do things, that things have power in their own right, as long as we do the ritual in the right way, then things will be fine. That is the Vedic idea. The Buddhist idea is completely opposite. Actually, the action doesn't really matter all that much. We can do all kinds of things. What matters is why we are doing that action. What is the motivation? What is the intention that lies behind it? That is the kind of the massive difference between Buddhist ideas and Hindu ideas. And I would really recommend you to investigate that in your own life, because if you do this in the right way, it is actually very liberating. It is just so, you start to become much more independent as a person if you are able to grasp this idea that it is intention that matters. And one of the things that I have noticed in my own life is that when I intend things with kindness, when there are people around me, and everything I do, I try to be kind. I try to ask myself, how can I be kind to the people at the BF right now? I really ask myself that question. How can I be as kind as possible? When I'm with my fellow monks, I ask myself, how can I be kind to my fellow monks right now? How can I say something kind? What action will be appropriate? How can I think a kind thought? I try to make everything I do into an act of kindness. It's very difficult. You don't always succeed, but a lot of the time you do succeed. A lot of the time you are just neutral, but sometimes you do succeed. And what happens when you do that is that sometimes, you know what it's like, you are misunderstood. You do an act out of kindness, you're coming from your heart, you're trying to do the right thing, and the other person gets upset. I'm sure you have every one of you has experienced that. This is such an important part, such a natural part of what it means to be human, because we don't understand each other all the time. We come from different perceptions, different angles, and even though we do our very best from inside, the other person misunderstands, and maybe they get angry with us, maybe they refuse to talk to us for a long time because of these kind of things. This is just how humanity works. We are like this. But the strange thing is that when I know that my intention is kindness, when I know that, and I also know that there will be people who misunderstand me, there will be people who say bad things about me, I can shrug my shoulders. I can say, I tried my best. I can go back to my kuti alone in the forest, and maybe it sounds very lonely, but actually it isn't all that lonely at all when you know how to use it. And you feel good about yourself because you tried. The fact that the other person misunderstands, you can just shrug your shoulders. It doesn't matter what the other person thinks. It's irrelevant because I know I came from the right place within me. I can still feel good about myself. And that is very powerful because it liberates you from the opinions of other people around you. It doesn't matter whether people around you receive what you say in the right way or the wrong way. There's always going to be someone who receives it the wrong way. Doesn't matter anymore. Why? Because you know that you're going to feel good about yourself afterwards because you did the very best. You may be a bit sad that the other person misunderstood. You may feel, what can I do to help this out again in the future? You may try to, mend fences again and make sure that things are well. But still, inside of you, you always have the sense of security that you did the right thing. It's actually very, very powerful because it means that other people have less control over you. They cannot manipulate you. Sometimes people manipulate you by saying things and that sort of stuff. But that becomes impossible with a person who has that kind of integrity. One of the other things which is kind of fascinating, talking about metta and talking about kutis, that just occurred to me now, is one of the things that people say, especially now during the pandemic time, and many people have kind of had to endure a lot of solitude, not being able to meet other people. And I gave a talk to the Indonesians quite recently, and they were saying a lot of people feeling kind of lonely and despairing, and Indonesia has apparently a very bad case of COVID right now in many of the cities, etc. And so they kind of asked how to deal with all of this, how to deal with loneliness by being by yourself. And the answer is a similar kind of thing. The answer is that the reason why we feel lonely is because we are separated from other people. other people give us a feeling of comradeship. They give us a feeling of friendship. They give us a feeling of metta, of compassion and understanding. That is why companionship is so important. When we are together with others, we feel the kind of positive energy of being together. Yeah. And then when we are separated out, we are missing out on that positive energy from other people. So the answer is very simple. Yeah, the answer of not feeling lonely is very, very simple. You have to create that same positive energy that you get in a relationship within your own mind. What is that positive energy called? It's called metta. Metta, kindness towards others. If you have metta, you have the thing within you that otherwise usually you seek from other people. Yeah, when you have metta inside, you never feel lonely. You always feel connected to the entire world, because metta is precisely that feeling of connection to other people. So when you are by yourself, when you go back to your, you are in lockdown or whatever, if you can develop that feeling of metta a little bit, yeah, if you can use those spiritual qualities that you have built up over a long time, you will never feel lonely, because the bond is there, right there within you. You feel bonded to the whole world. In fact, if you're a good meditator, you feel more bonded to the whole world in solitude than around other people. Because other people can often disturb a little bit of the metta, but in solitude, it's not going to happen.
Thank you, Ajahn. There's another question. What happens to non-Buddhists after they die? Will they be reborn, as their religions don't believe in rebirth?
The thing that we are trying to discover in Buddhism, we're trying to discover the truth. Yeah, we're trying to understand the world as it actually is. So what we are trying to see is how the world operates. And either there is a rebirth or there is not. Either everyone gets reborn or no one gets reborn. Yeah, because these are principles for how the world works. These are not kind of things that are specific to a religion. A religion is just an idea of the world. But the actual way the world works must be the same for everybody. Otherwise, it doesn't it doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So the answer is yes. If there is rebirth, then everyone gets reborn. If there is no rebirth, no one gets reborn. I think there is rebirth, therefore I would say everyone gets reborn.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor before I read the last question from online? No? Giving you a chance? No? Okay, last question, Ajahn. How do we explain the concept of no God to my children or those who believe in a God? I think she meant creator God. I tried to use thermodynamics laws to explain since energy cannot be destroyed but transformed for another form. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. It is, when you talk with people who believe in the creator God, you have to be very careful, because these are often emotional things. They're not logical things. And you will not be able to persuade someone with logic. Usually, you can tell them that a creator God is just an idea, that no such thing can actually be experienced. You can say that the idea of a Christian creator God doesn't make any sense, because how can an all-loving God create a universe with so much suffering? You can come up with lots and lots of really good ideas why there is no creator God. But if someone is vested in that and they are emotionally invested in that, it's very difficult to shift them and to kind of make a difference. Yeah. So I guess sometimes what you can say is that you can, just say things like, well, in Buddhism, we don't believe in a creator God. And what that might do is that might open them to the possibility that there is another way of looking at the world. Just by saying that opens up the possibility that there is an alternative view. And then over time, that may have an effect on them. Yeah, they might think, yeah, maybe a good point. Yeah, actually, this God not really done all that much good for me anyway, so maybe I should kind of maybe I should think a bit differently about things, or something like that. And then there may be a shift in the way they think about things. So, one of the things that I would say is that even if you are a Buddhist, you don't necessarily know that there is no creator God. A lot of the things that we have as Buddhists are also beliefs. Yeah, we may believe in rebirth, doesn't mean that we know that there is rebirth. These things are different things. So I think for everyone, whether you are a Christian or a Buddhist or whatever, it is very important to keep an open mind, because we want to discover reality. We want to discover the world. We want to see things as they actually are, because when you see things as they actually are, that is when you can make good decisions. We have to make decisions based on reality, not on fantasy. If you make decisions based on fantasy, you're going to make lots of bad mistakes. Yeah, so it's good to acknowledge that sometimes we just have faith and belief. Maybe that faith and belief happens to be right, but maybe it's not. And when we do that, we also have less arguments with the people around us. But I don't think there is such a thing as a creator God. To me, that idea does not make any sense. And so just throw it out there, and just to open people's minds, and then maybe in the future they will come to a conclusion of their own instead.
Thank you, Ajahn. Let's say 3 sadhus and then invite Ajahn for blessing. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Ajahn, maybe share merits and then ask you for a blessing for all of us.
Let's do the sharing of merit first of all. Edang men yatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Edang men yatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Edang men yatinang hotu sukita hontu nyatayo. Okay, so we'll give you a quick Buddhist blessing here. So here we go. Nāti-me saranang anyang, Buddho me saranang varang, etena sacava, jena soti te hotu sambada. Nāti-me saranang anyang, Dhammo me saranang varang, etena sacava, nasoti te hotu sabada. Nāti-me saranang anyang, Sangho me saranang varang, etena sacava, jena soti te hotu sabada.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Ajahn. Let's pay respects to Ajahn before we do our own closing.
Let's pay respect to the Buddha first of all, just very briefly.
The triple gem first, then
Triple gem, yeah. Let's do the Arahang Samma together.
Okay.
Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Svakato Bhagavata Dhammo, Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sanghang Namami.
Okay, let's pay respects to Ajahn. Thank you, Ajahn.
Okay. Bye-bye. Take care. Take care, everyone. Bye.
You are closing. Thank you, Ajahn. Okay, help build our Dhamma home. So do donate generously if you can for us to have our new Dhamma home. Okay, next week we have Bante 𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗡𝗚, okay, who is giving us the talk on karma. So do not miss this opportunity to listen to more on karma. Bante will explain all the concepts and debunk the myths. September, we have other NG Chiu will be talking about transforming negative emotions into positive force. Please note that this talk will not be uploaded on YouTube or Facebook, so do come on site. Then we have our last talk by Sister Sylvia Bay. BF Youth, do look out for the poster 2 to 5. They will be holding it at BF East starting this month. So look for the announcements. Indonesian service, as usual. Though can't see very clearly. Dhamma Foundation course, if you have not signed up, it started yesterday, and there are Zoom vacancies, and maybe 1 or 2 who converted on site to Zoom. So do look out. Maybe on Tuesday, if we release a couple of places for on site, if you are keen to look out for it, and if you're not keen on site, you can always sign up for Zoom. And the videos and the slides that you have missed yesterday will be sent to you. Thank you. Then, any more? Okay, Bante 𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗡𝗚𝗏 will be doing the Zoom talk for Indonesia service on the 19th of September. For junior youth, every Saturday, 3 to 5 p.m. as usual, Zoom. Rahula Connects, the next session will be for lower primary on the 19th of September. Please join them through Zoom online. Yin Yoga, 21st September to 23rd September, starting soon every Tuesday at BF East, 7:30 to 8:45 p.m. That's all for the announcements, and we shall do our closing. Dedication of merits. Please let us invite all sentient beings to participate in our quiet merits. 𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗡𝗚𝗓𝗛 Sambadang punya sampadang sabbe deva anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya 𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗡𝗚𝗓𝗛 Sambadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya 𝗕𝗏𝗦𝗡𝗚𝗓𝗛 Sambadang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Let us dedicate the merits of participating in a wholesome Dhamma activity to our departed relatives and friends. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. Idang me nyatinang hotu sukhita hontu nyatayo. End of service dedication. I dedicate the merits which I have accumulated to the cultivation of my mind in order to bring happiness and benefits to all sentient beings. I dedicate the merits to my parents, children, spouse, relatives, friends, colleagues, and my adversaries, wishing them long life, good health, happiness, and prosperity. May we never part from the triple gem, and may we always walk the path towards enlightenment. Closing homage, let us pay respects to the triple gem. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, brothers and sisters in the Dhamma. Thanks for joining us this week. Next week, we are back to 10:30 a.m. So do sign up for the on-site talk. See you then. Bye.